Picture this. A charismatic leader emerges during economic uncertainty. They promise to restore greatness, eliminate enemies, and simplify complex problems into one powerful solution. Their campaign videos go viral. Millions share their content. Pollsters predict a landslide victory. Here's a question. If a dictator from the 1930s ran for office today, with access to TikTok, algorithmic targeting, and professional image consultants, would you recognize them? Before you answer, consider this. Stalin could rebrand as the ultimate strong leader who gets things done. The gulags, buried under trending hashtags and emotional campaign ads designed to trigger dopamine responses. The real question isn't whether we're smarter than previous generations, it's whether manipulation has gotten better while we've stayed the same. A leader doesn't need to be competent, they just need to appear competent. They don't need real solutions, just the feeling of a solution. This isn't political theory, it's a psychological playbook being executed right now, and the research suggests something disturbing. We're not just vulnerable to it, we're predictably vulnerable. Think about the last time you saw two experts debate on TV. One carefully qualified their statements. The data suggests there's about a 60% probability we need more research. The other spoke in absolutes. This is exactly what will happen, I guarantee it. Anyone who disagrees is lying to you. Who did you trust more? Many of us gravitate towards the second one. That instinct made evolutionary sense. Decisive leaders could save the tribe. But in complex modern societies, that same instinct becomes a vulnerability. There's a fundamental insight from philosophy here. Nietzsche identified what he called the will to power, this innate drive within us to admire strength, dominance, and certainty, because these represent qualities we desperately wish we possessed. We're hardwired to follow confident leaders, even when their confidence is completely unjustified. Benito Mussolini understood this instinctively. He spent hours perfecting theatrical gestures and voice modulation. His policies were often incoherent, but his presence was masterful. Italians weren't voting for economic plans. They were voting for the feeling of strength his performance generated. The Renaissance political philosopher Niccolò Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be, few know what you are." He wasn't celebrating deception. He was documenting a harsh reality. Appearance is public and immediate. Reality is private and delayed. A leader doesn't need to actually be strong, competent, or honest. They only need to appear that way long enough to consolidate power. Modern psychology calls this authority bias. Our brains evolved to quickly identify and defer to dominant individuals because in ancestral environments, following the strongest leader often meant survival. Stanley Milgram's famous experiments revealed just how powerful this instinct remains. Ordinary people administered what they believed were painful electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to continue. The experimental subjects weren't sadists. They weren't stupid. They were demonstrating a hardwired psychological vulnerability that authoritarians have exploited for millennia. Voters systematically confuse confidence with competence. A leader who admits uncertainty gets labeled as weak. A leader who admits no doubts gets labeled as strong, even when their confidence is completely unjustified. Neuroscience research shows that witnessing displays of absolute certainty activates brain regions associated with safety and protection. The authoritarian leader becomes a psychological security blanket. So ask yourself, when was the last time you heard a leader say, "I don't know," and respected them more for it? Or did that admission of uncertainty make you uncomfortable? Did it make them seem weak? That discomfort you're feeling? That's the vulnerability talking. Individual vulnerability is one thing, but what happens when millions of people share the same blind spot? That's when we get something far more dangerous. Collective delusion. Plato understood this 2,400 years ago with his Allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained inside a cave spend their lives watching shadows on a wall, believing the shadows are reality. When one escapes and discovers the actual world, he returns to share this truth, and the other prisoners reject him violently. They prefer the comfortable shadows to the painful complexity of reality. Contemporary authoritarian movements thrive by constructing simplified shadow worlds where complex problems have single causes and single solutions. Immigration causes your economic problems. The media causes social division. That other political party is destroying everything. These shadows are emotionally satisfying because they transform overwhelming complexity into manageable narratives. And here's the critical part. This happens across the political spectrum. Now add the Dunning-Kruger Effect, one of psychology's most replicated findings. People with limited understanding of complex subjects consistently overestimate their knowledge. They literally can't recognize their own incompetence because the skills needed to produce correct answers are the same skills needed to recognize what a correct answer looks like. This creates the perfect constituency for authoritarian messaging. Someone who spent 30 minutes watching YouTube videos about monetary policy genuinely believes they understand economics better than career economists. Someone who read conspiracy blogs feels more informed than investigative journalists with decades of experience. And this isn't a left or right issue. Conservative viewers might be vulnerable to narratives about cultural decay and traditional values under attack. Progressive viewers might be vulnerable to narratives about systemic oppression and moral urgency requiring immediate action. The mechanism is identical, only the content changes. Authoritarians on the left promise to save you from capitalism and inequality. Authoritarians on the right promise to save you from chaos and cultural destruction. Different villains, same playbook. We've all said I did my own research about complex topics, but what does that actually mean? Did you read peer-reviewed studies, examine methodologies, and seek out perspectives that challenged your assumptions? Or did you find sources that confirmed what you already believed until you felt certain? Social media supercharges this effect. Algorithms don't show you truth, they show you engagement. And what engages us most? Content that confirms our existing beliefs. Content that makes our tribe feel right and the other tribe feel wrong. The more research we do in our algorithmically curated bubbles, the more confident we become. And the more confident we become, the less we realize how wrong we might be. We're not the prisoners trying to escape Plato's cave. We're the prisoners attacking anyone who suggests the shadows aren't real. Let me ask you something. What would you give up to feel safe? Thomas Hobbes, writing after witnessing the chaos of civil war, understood something crucial. When people perceive their lives as threatened by chaos, they will surrender virtually any freedom to whoever promises security. He called the natural state of humanity nasty, brutish, and short, and argued that rational people would voluntarily submit to absolute authority to escape perpetual violence and uncertainty. Modern political science has confirmed his prediction with disturbing precision. Terror management theory, developed in the 1980s, demonstrates that when people are reminded of death or existential threats, they gravitate towards strong leaders and nationalistic symbols. Researchers have replicated this effect hundreds of times. Simply asking participants to think about their own mortality makes them more supportive of authoritarian policies, more hostile to outsiders, and more willing to sacrifice civil liberties for perceived safety. Track authoritarian polling numbers over the past century, and a clear pattern emerges. Every time societies experience economic collapse, crime waves, pandemic uncertainty, or technological disruption, law and order candidates surge in popularity. The content of their policies matters less than the strength of their promise to restore control. Think about your own psychology right now. Economic uncertainty about AI and automation, social anxiety about changing cultural norms, existential dread about climate change, information overload from competing news sources, algorithmic feeds designed to maximize anxiety because anxious users engage more. Now introduce a candidate who says, "I alone can fix this. Trust me, and I'll eliminate the threats." The rational part of your brain knows this is oversimplified, but your amygdala, the ancient fear processing center, doesn't care about rationality, it wants protection. When you feel like civilization is collapsing, a dictator doesn't look frightening. They look like salvation. After terrorist attacks, approval ratings reliably spike for leaders who promise forceful retaliation. This happened after 9/11 in the US, after the Bataclan attacks in France, after the Moscow theater siege. The pattern transcends political systems and ideologies. We consciously know that surveillance and reduced due process threaten our freedoms, but our unconscious minds are screaming for a protector figure. Notice what happens. The news that makes us afraid also shapes what kind of leader feels appealing. The dictator's greatest ally isn't weapons or propaganda. It's your fear. And in a world deliberately designed to keep you afraid, that's a terrifying advantage. Previous generations of authoritarians faced genuine obstacles: limited media access, slow information spread, physical constraints on propaganda reach. Modern technology has eliminated every single barrier. But here's what most people miss. Social media platforms aren't neutral communication tools. They're engagement engines, and engagement algorithms have well-documented biases toward emotional content, particularly anger and fear. These emotions generate the most clicks, shares, and time on platform. Research from platform whistleblowers and academic studies suggests that simple, emotionally charged messaging often outperforms nuanced policy discussion and algorithmic ranking, regardless of which political direction it comes from. But it gets worse. A modern authoritarian wouldn't need to suppress information the way Stalin did. Information suppression creates martyrs and resistance. Instead, they deploy information flooding, releasing so much contradictory content that citizens experience narrative exhaustion and simply choose whichever story aligns with their identity. Scholars call this the firehose of falsehood propaganda model. High volume, multi-channel, rapid and continuous, repetition without consistency. The goal isn't to convince, it's to exhaust critical thinking until people surrender to whichever narrative their in-group endorses. Think about how you consume news. Do you carefully verify each claim? Or do you scroll until something feels true, share it, and move on? Consider this. A modern dictator wouldn't burn books. They'd flood the market with so many books that finding truth becomes impossible. They wouldn't silence journalists. They'd label 1,000 voices as fake news until the very concept of a trusted journalist seems absurd. They don't create silence. They create overwhelming noise. And here's the mechanism that makes everything worse. Social media doesn't just expose people to authoritarian messaging. It trains people to think like authoritarians. The platform dynamics reward certainty over nuance, emotion over evidence, and tribal loyalty over intellectual honesty. By the time a dictator-style candidate emerges, the population has already been psychologically prepared to embrace them. So let me ask you, how much of your political worldview has been shaped by what the algorithm decided to show you? Do you even know? Here's the hopeful part. None of these vulnerabilities are absolute. They're tendencies, not destinies. And understanding the mechanism of manipulation is the first step toward resisting it. The antidote to authoritarian psychology isn't more intelligence, it's intellectual humility. The recognition that our confidence often exceeds our knowledge. When you genuinely understand how little you know about complex systems like economics, geopolitics, or social policy, you become less susceptible to leaders who claim to have all the answers. Psychological research shows that people who score high on intellectual humility are significantly less likely to fall for conspiracy theories, less vulnerable to partisan tribalism, and more capable of changing their minds when presented with evidence. Next time you feel absolutely certain about a political issue, try this. Set a timer for 3 minutes and explain the strongest version of the opposing argument. Not a straw man, but the actual best case the other side would make. If you can't do this compellingly, you don't understand the issue as well as you think you do. This humility extends to emotional awareness. The most powerful defense against algorithmic manipulation isn't fact-checking every claim. It's recognizing your emotional state while consuming content. When you feel that surge of righteous anger scrolling through social media, pause. How does this make me feel, and why? Is this information designed to inform me or trigger me? Am I being given complexity or comforting simplicity? The moment you recognize the emotional manipulation, its power diminishes. But individual awareness isn't enough. History shows that democracies survive authoritarian threats through strong, independent institutions that distribute power and constrain any single leader's authority. Democratic institutions are slow, frustrating, and maddeningly complex. They're designed that way. The friction isn't a bug, it's the feature that prevents any single person from accumulating enough power to become dangerous. There's also a communal dimension to resistance. The dictator's power comes from turning citizens against each other, from making us see neighbors as enemies. Every relationship you maintain across political divides is an act of democratic resistance. This doesn't mean abandoning principles. It means recognizing that the person who votes differently isn't necessarily stupid or evil. They're responding to the same psychological vulnerabilities we all possess, just triggered by different narratives. Challenge yourself. When was the last time you had a genuine conversation, not a debate, a conversation with someone who voted differently than you? Not to win, not to change their mind, just to understand their actual reasoning? If the answer is never, or I can't remember, you're more vulnerable than you think. So let's address this directly. Is this really about stupidity? No. Intelligence has almost nothing to do with vulnerability to authoritarianism. High IQ individuals fall for authoritarian messaging at similar rates to low IQ individuals when the right psychological buttons are pressed. Educated professionals supported fascist movements throughout the 20th century. University professors signed loyalty oaths. Doctors participated in eugenic programs. Intelligence offers no protection. What makes populations vulnerable isn't cognitive deficiency, it's the universal architecture of human psychology. Fear overrides logic. Certainty feels better than truth. Emotion outpaces evidence. Identity dictates our facts. We submit to authority. We judge by appearance. We cling to our tribe. These aren't bugs in our psychological code. They're features, ancient survival tools that have become dangerous in the modern world. What appears as collective stupidity is actually the predictable operation of cognitive systems that authoritarians have learned to manipulate with scientific precision. Consider the full picture. A society facing economic uncertainty experiences heightened fear responses. Algorithms amplify that fear while suppressing nuanced analysis. A charismatic leader emerges offering simple solutions, projecting confidence through carefully designed imagery. They activate authority bias, provide tribal identity, and promise security in exchange for obedience. Their messaging spreads through social networks that reward emotional engagement over factual accuracy. Opposition appears weak and uncertain by comparison, because honesty requires admitting complexity. At every stage, normal human psychology is being weaponized. This is why historical knowledge offers incomplete protection. People study Nazi Germany and think, I would never fall for that, while simultaneously supporting modern political movements that deploy identical psychological tactics with updated technology. The uncomfortable truth: dictators don't seize power. Populations invite them in. And they invite them in not despite democratic institutions, but through them. The ballot box becomes the mechanism of democratic suicide because voters are selecting based on psychological satisfaction rather than rational interest. Remember that opening question? Would you recognize a dictator today? Now you know it's the wrong question. The right question is, are you building the psychological defenses that make manipulation harder? Not a cartoon villain with obvious evil intentions. A sophisticated operator with professional branding, algorithmic amplification, and psychological manipulation techniques refined by decades of behavioral research. Someone who makes you feel safe during uncertainty. Someone who projects the confidence you wish you had. Someone whose messaging feels emotionally true even when factually questionable. someone whose appearance and presentation trigger all the right neurological responses. Would you see through it, or would you mistake manufactured strength for genuine leadership? The historical dictators we studied didn't succeed because past generations were uniquely gullible. They succeeded because they understood timeless features of human psychology, and those features haven't gone anywhere. Every psychological vulnerability we've discussed, authority bias, the Dunning-Kruger Effect, terror management theory, tribal identity, algorithmic manipulation, exists in your brain right now. You're not immune. None of us are. The only question is whether you'll recognize the manipulation when it targets you specifically. Here's my challenge to you. Over the next week, pay attention to your reactions to political content. Notice when you feel that surge of emotion. Notice when something feels obviously true without evidence. Notice when you're about to share something without verifying it. Notice when you dismiss someone's concerns because they're from the other side. Those moments? That's where the vulnerability lives. The playbook is open. The plays are being run. The algorithms are already running. The psychological buttons are already being pressed. The only question left is, are you watching the shadows on the cave wall, or have you turned around to see the machinery casting them? The turn away from the shadows begins with that single question. It continues by questioning your own emotional reactions, by valuing complexity over simplicity, and by recognizing that true strength isn't in having all the answers, it's in having the courage to live with difficult questions. Because in the end, the dictator's greatest weapon isn't their strength, it's our desperate desire to stop thinking for ourselves. Here's what I believe. Awareness is the first line of defense. You're watching this video, which means you're already doing the hard work of questioning your own psychology. That's not weakness, that's strength. The dictator wins when we stop thinking critically. They lose when we start. Share your thoughts in the comments. What psychological vulnerability do you think you're most susceptible to? Let's figure this out together.